The eviction notice trembled between Camille Washington's fingers like a yellow flag of surrender, its bold black letters blurring through the tears she refused to let fall. The paper felt heavier than it should have, heavier than the $20 bill tucked beneath it, which represented everything her late husband Marcus had left behind after 18 months of medical bills had devoured their savings, their dreams, and finally, their home. "Mama, why are you crying?" 6-year-old Aria's voice cut through the suffocating silence of their cramped apartment, her small hand reaching up to touch Camille's cheek. The little girl's twin sister, Zoe, pressed closer on the opposite side of the worn couch, her dark eyes wide with the kind of premature wisdom that poverty forces upon children too young to understand its weight. Camille's breath caught in her throat as she looked at her daughters, Marcus's daughters, with his gentle eyes and stubborn chin. They wore mismatched clothes from the local thrift store, their hair pulled into neat braids that Camille had woven with trembling fingers that morning, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in their crumbling world. The October afternoon light filtering through their single window seemed too bright, too cheerful for the darkness closing in around them. "I'm not crying, baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator that had been making noises for weeks. "Mama's just thinking." But thinking wouldn't pay the 3 months back rent they owed. Thinking wouldn't put food in the refrigerator that might stop working any day. And thinking certainly wouldn't explain to her 6-year-old daughters why they might be sleeping in their car tomorrow night, if the car didn't get repossessed first. Camille folded the eviction notice with mechanical precision, her hands steady despite the earthquake in her chest. She had exactly 24 hours to produce $3,400 or find herself and her twins on the street. The number felt impossible, astronomical, as unreachable as the stars her daughters still wished upon every night before bed. The knock at the door came sharp and unexpected, cutting through her spiraling thoughts like a blade through silk. Camille's body tensed. Landlords didn't usually make house calls, and bill collectors had learned months ago that showing up in person yielded the same results as their relentless phone calls. Nothing. "Stay here," she murmured to the twins, smoothing down her worn sweater as she approached the door. Through the peephole, she saw a tall black man in an expensive-looking charcoal suit, holding a leather briefcase that probably cost more than her monthly salary at the diner where she waited tables. His salt-and-pepper beard was meticulously groomed, and something about his posture suggested both authority and unexpected kindness. Camille's pulse quickened. Rich men in expensive suits didn't visit her neighborhood unless something was very wrong, or very, very right. She opened the door just wide enough to peer out, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you? Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're enjoying today's story, click the subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from because, tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now back to the story. "Mrs. Washington?" His voice was warm, cultured, with a slight southern accent that reminded her of her grandmother's Sunday sermons. "My name is Theodore Whitmore. I'm an attorney, and I've been looking for you for quite some time." The words hung in the air between them like suspended raindrops, each syllable carrying weight she couldn't yet comprehend. Behind her, she could hear Aria and Zoe whispering to each other, their young voices filled with curiosity about the stranger at their door. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person," Camille said, though something deep in her chest fluttered like a caged bird sensing freedom. "I don't know any lawyers, and I certainly haven't been expecting any." Theodore Whitmore smiled then, a genuine expression that reached his eyes and transformed his distinguished features. "Mrs. Washington, what I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, but I assure you it's very real. Your late husband, Marcus Washington, was the beneficiary of an estate that has been waiting for him, and now you, for over 30 years. The chain lock suddenly felt flimsy between them, an inadequate barrier against words that didn't make sense, couldn't make sense, not when she was holding an eviction notice and counting quarters for dinner. "That's impossible." Marcus didn't have any family with money. His parents died when he was young, and he grew up in foster care. That's what he believed, Theodore said gently, his eyes holding hers with steady compassion. But sometimes, Mrs. Washington, the stories we tell ourselves about our past are just the beginning of the truth, not the end of it. From behind her came the soft patting of small feet, and Camille felt Aria's warm body press against her leg. "Mama, who's the man in the fancy suit?" The question hung in the air, simple and innocent, yet somehow it felt like the most important question anyone had ever asked. Camille's hand moved instinctively to the eviction notice folded in her pocket, its sharp edges a stark reminder of her reality, while this stranger stood before her claiming impossible things about inheritances and 30-year-old secrets. What would you do if a stranger appeared at your door claiming your late spouse had a secret inheritance waiting? Would you trust them, or would you assume it was too good to be true? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes life's most extraordinary moments come disguised as the impossible. The afternoon sun caught Theodore Whitmore's briefcase as he shifted it to his other hand, and for just a moment, Camille could swear she saw something that looked remarkably like hope reflecting back at her. Camille's fingers worked the chain lock with trembling precision, her mind racing between skepticism and desperate hope. In the 18 months since Marcus's death, she had learned to recognize the difference between genuine kindness and predatory sympathy, and something about Theodore Whitmore's patient stance, the way he didn't push or demand entry, suggested the former. "Girls, go play in your room for a minute," she said softly, never taking her eyes off the lawyer. Aria and Zoe exchanged glances, the silent communication of twins who had learned to read their mother's moods like weather patterns, before padding away on bare feet. Only when she heard their bedroom door click shut did Camille fully open her apartment door. Theodore stepped inside, his expensive shoes silent on the threadbare carpet, and she watched his eyes take in their modest surroundings without judgment. He didn't flinch at the water stain on the ceiling or the duct tape holding together the arm of their second-hand sofa. Instead, his gaze settled on the photographs covering the small table by the window. Dozens of pictures of Marcus with the twins, Marcus with Camille, Marcus laughing at birthday parties and Christmas mornings that now felt like scenes from someone else's life. "He was a good man," Theodore said quietly, approaching the photos with reverence. "You can see it in his eyes. The way he looked at you all." Camille's throat tightened. "You never met him." "No, but I've been searching for him for 3 decades. I know more about Marcus Washington than he ever knew about himself." Theodore set his briefcase on the small dining table and clicked it open with practiced precision. "Mrs. Washington, may I call you Camille? What I'm about to share with you will change everything you thought you knew about your husband's past." "Call me Camille," she agreed, settling onto the edge of the couch, her body rigid with tension. "But before you say anything else, I need you to know something. Marcus and we didn't have secrets between us. We talked about everything, his childhood in foster care, his dreams, his fears. If there was family money somewhere, he would have told me." Theodore's expression softened with something that looked like compassion mixed with profound sadness. "Camille, what if I told you that Marcus never knew? That he was taken from his family when he was barely 2 years old, too young to remember, and the people who were supposed to protect him made sure he never found out who he really was?" The words hit her like cold water. Camille thought about Marcus's recurring nightmares, the way he would sometimes wake up crying about dreams he couldn't quite remember. Dreams about a woman singing lullabies in a voice that wasn't his foster mother's. About a house with wide porches and the sound of wind chimes. "That's impossible," she whispered, but even as she spoke, doubt crept into her voice. Theodore pulled out a manila folder thick with documents and photographs. "Marcus Washington was born Marcus Beauregard III, heir to one of Louisiana's oldest and wealthiest families. His grandmother, Evangeline Beauregard, has been searching for him since the day he disappeared from a New Orleans hospital 34 years ago." Camille's world tilted sideways. "Disappeared?" Marcus wasn't abandoned. He was surrendered by a teenage mother who couldn't take care of him. That's what the falsified documents said, yes? Theodore's voice grew gentle but firm. But Marcus didn't surrender, Camille. He was stolen. Taken by a corrupt social worker who was paid to make wealthy children disappear into the foster system, where they could never reclaim their inheritance. The photograph Theodore placed before her stole the breath from her lungs. It showed a distinguished elderly black woman with Marcus's eyes and Marcus's stubborn chin, standing in front of a mansion that looked like something from a fairy tale. Spanish moss draped the ancient oak trees surrounding the house like nature's own curtains, and the wraparound porch seemed to go on forever. This is Evangeline Beauregard, your husband's grandmother. She's 87 years old, and she's been waiting for Marcus to come home for over 3 decades. When she learned of his death, Theodore's voice caught. She wept for 3 days straight. But when I told her about you and the twins, she said something I'll never forget. Then God gave him time to create the family I never got to meet, and now he's bringing them home to me. Camille stared at the photograph, her mind reeling. The woman in the picture had Marcus's smile, the crooked grin that had made Camille fall in love with him during their first conversation at the community college library. But it was more than physical resemblance. Something about the woman's posture, the way she held her head, reminded Camille of how Marcus stood when he was being particularly stubborn about something he believed in. "Why now?" Camille asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you telling me this now, when it's too late for him to meet her?" Theodore leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because it's not too late for you and the girls. Because Evangeline Beauregard is dying, Camille, and her greatest wish is to know her great-granddaughters before she passes. Because the Beauregard estate, all of it, legally belongs to Marcus's heirs. How much money are we talking about?" The question slipped out before Camille could stop it, and she immediately felt ashamed for asking. But Theodore's smile was understanding. "Enough to ensure that Aria and Zoe never want for anything. Enough to pay for the best education, the best opportunities, the best life Marcus ever dreamed of giving them." He paused, studying her face. "But more importantly, it's about my family, Camille. It's about those little girls having a great-grandmother who's been praying for them since before they were born." From the bedroom came the sound of muffled giggling, Aria and Zoe playing some elaborate game that involved dramatic whispers and what sounded like stuffed animals having important conversations. The sound of their innocence, their resilience despite everything they'd endured, brought fresh tears to Camille's eyes. "I need to think about this," she said finally. It's too much. Too impossible." Theodore nodded, closing the folder but leaving the photograph of Evangeline Beauregard on the table. "I understand completely. But Camille, I need you to know something else. Tomorrow morning, I'm driving to Louisiana to update Mrs. Beauregard on my search. I have a car outside, and there's nothing I would like more than to bring her granddaughter-in-law and great-granddaughters home with me." "Tomorrow?" Camille's heart hammered against her ribs. "I can't just leave tomorrow. I have a job, responsibilities." "You have an eviction notice," Theodore said gently, and Camille realized he had noticed more during his brief scan of the apartment than she thought. "You have 24 hours to come up with money you don't have. What if instead of scrambling for rent money, you spent those 24 hours discovering that your daughters are heiresses?" The bedroom door opened, and Aria peeked out, her hair slightly mussed from whatever game she'd been playing. "Mama, can we have a snack? Zoe's tummy is making growling noises." Camille looked from her daughter's hopeful face to the photograph of the grandmother Marcus had never known existed, and felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of desperation she'd been carrying since the day Marcus died. What if this impossible story was actually true? What if her daughters really did have family waiting for them in Louisiana? What if the $20 in her pocket wasn't the end of their story, but the beginning of something she'd never dared to dream? The decision crystallized in Camille's mind like ice forming on a winter window, sudden, inevitable, and surprisingly clear. She looked at Aria's expectant face, then at Theodore's patient expression, and felt Marcus's presence as surely as if he were standing beside her, whispering the words he used to say when life felt overwhelming. Sometimes you have to jump, baby. Sometimes the net appears only after you're already falling. Yes, she said, the word escaping before her rational mind could intercept it. We'll come with you. Theodore's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to agree so quickly. Are you certain? This is a life-changing decision, Camille. Once we leave for Louisiana, there's no going back to the way things were. The way things were is about to put my daughters on the street, Camille replied, surprised by the strength in her own voice. If you're lying to me, Mr. Whitmore, we'll be no worse off than we are right now. But if you're telling the truth, then your daughters will finally have the life Marcus always wanted to give them, Theodore finished softly. From the kitchen came the sound of the refrigerator's dying compressor giving one final, shuddering wheeze before falling silent. Camille closed her eyes and laughed, actually laughed, at the absurd timing of it all. That's the universe making the decision for us, she said, opening her eyes to find Theodore watching her with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. Girls, she called toward the bedroom. Come here, please. We need to talk. Aria and Zoe emerged hand in hand, their identical faces wearing matching expressions of curiosity mixed with caution. At 6 years old, they had already learned to read the subtle signs that preceded major changes in their small world. Camille knelt to their eye level, taking each small hand in hers. Remember how I used to tell you stories about Daddy when he was little? About how he grew up without knowing his real family? You said his mommy and Daddy went to heaven before he could remember them, Zoe said solemnly. That's what we all believed, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups don't know the whole story. Camille glanced up at Theodore, who nodded encouragingly. It turns out Daddy had a grandmother who's been looking for him his whole life. And now she wants to meet you. Aria's eyes went wide. We have a great-grandma? Her name is Evangeline, Theodore said, settling into the chair across from them with surprising grace for such a tall man. And she lives in the most beautiful house you've ever seen, with gardens full of flowers and a porch swing that's been waiting for little girls to play on it. Is she nice? Zoe asked, ever the more cautious twin. She's wonderful, Theodore assured her. She has pictures of your daddy when he was your age, and she knows lullabies that his great-great-grandmother used to sing. She's been saving stories just for you. Camille watched her daughters process this information with the remarkable adaptability of children who had already weathered more storms than most adults. But it was Aria who asked the question that cut straight to the heart of everything. Does this mean we don't have to move away from our home? The innocence of it, the way she still thought of their cramped, failing apartment as home, nearly broke Camille's heart. Baby, it means we get to have a new home. A bigger one, where you'll each have your own room and space to run and play. Together? Zoe pressed. All of us together? All of us together, Camille confirmed, though even as she spoke the words, a flutter of anxiety danced in her chest. What if Evangeline Beauregard was nothing like Theodore described? What if this was all some elaborate con game, and she was about to drag her children into something dangerous? As if reading her thoughts, Theodore reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick legal document. Before we leave, I want you to see this. It's Marcus's birth certificate, his real birth certificate, issued by the state of Louisiana. And this, he placed another document beside it, is the deed to the Beauregard estate, naming Marcus Beauregard III as the sole heir. Camille stared at the papers, her eyes tracing the elegant script that spelled out her late husband's true name. Marcus Beauregard III. It looked foreign and familiar at the same time, like seeing a beloved friend wearing clothes you'd never seen before. There's something else, Theodore said quietly, producing a small, velvet jewelry box. Evangeline asked me to give this to you when I found you. She said it belonged to Marcus's mother, your daughter's grandmother. Inside the box lay a delicate gold locket, its surface engraved with intertwining roses. Camille's breath caught as she opened it to reveal two tiny photographs. A young black woman with Aria's smile and Zoe's thoughtful eyes, and beside her, a man who looked remarkably like Marcus might have, had he lived to see 30. Marcus's parents, Theodore explained. They died in a car accident when he was 18 months old. Evangeline was his legal guardian, but she was in the hospital recovering from surgery when he was taken. By the time she was well enough to fight the system, he had vanished completely. Aria leaned against Camille's shoulder, peering at the locket. She looks like us, Mama. She does, doesn't she? Camille whispered, tracing the edge of the photograph with her fingertip. For the first time since Theodore had appeared at her door, the story felt completely, undeniably real. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs outside made them all freeze. Camille recognized the distinctive pattern, Mr. Rodriguez, their landlord, taking the steps two at a time in the way he did when he was angry about something. The knock that followed was sharp, impatient. Mrs. Washington! I know you're in there. We need to talk about your situation. Camille's stomach clenched. She had hoped to avoid this conversation until tomorrow, had prayed for just one more night to figure out a solution that didn't exist. But through the thin walls of the apartment, she could hear Mr. Rodriguez's heavy breathing, could practically feel his impatience radiating through the door. Theodore stood smoothly, straightening his tie with practiced calm. Would you like me to speak with him? No, Camille said, surprised by her own certainty. This is something I need to handle. She turned to the twins, who were watching with wide, worried eyes. Girls, why don't you go pack your favorite clothes and toys in your school backpacks? We're going on an adventure. Right now? Zoe asked. Right now, Camille confirmed. Pack like we're going to stay somewhere wonderful for a very long time. As the twins scurried toward their bedroom, chattering excitedly about which stuffed animals absolutely had to come on the adventure, Camille straightened her shoulders and walked to the door. She could face Mr. Rodriguez now with something she hadn't had an hour ago, options. Mr. Rodriguez, she said, opening the door to reveal the stocky landlord's flushed face. I was just about to call you. Save it, Mrs. Washington. I've heard all the excuses. I need the back rent money by tomorrow, or I'm starting eviction proceedings immediately. No more extensions, no more sob stories. Behind her, Theodore stepped into view, and Camille watched Mr. Rodriguez's expression shift from aggressive impatience to cautious confusion. Men in $1,000 suits didn't often appear in his building. Actually, Mr. Rodriguez, Camille said, feeling a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. I won't be needing any extensions. I'm moving out tonight. The landlord's mouth fell open slightly. Tonight? But the lease will be broken, and you'll keep the security deposit to cover any penalties, Camille said smoothly. I assume that's acceptable? For a moment, Mr. Rodriguez looked almost disappointed, as if he'd been looking forward to a fight that was no longer available to him. Well, yes, I suppose that would be acceptable. Wonderful. Camille extended her hand with newfound confidence. It's been a pleasure, Mr. Rodriguez. I hope the next tenant brings you less stress. As the landlord shuffled away, still looking bewildered by the turn of events, Camille closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. That, Theodore said with genuine admiration, was impressively handled. I can't believe I just did that, Camille admitted, then laughed at the absurdity of it all. I just made myself homeless on the word of a stranger. You made yourself free, Theodore corrected gently. There's a difference. From the bedroom came the sound of the twins packing with the kind of enthusiasm only children could muster for unexpected adventures. In 30 minutes, Camille realized they would be walking away from the only life she'd known since Marcus died. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in 18 months, she felt something that had been missing for so long she'd almost forgotten its name: hope. The drive to Louisiana began in darkness, with the twins sleeping peacefully in the back seat of Theodore's immaculate black Mercedes while the city lights of their old life faded behind them. Camille sat in the passenger seat, clutching the velvet jewelry box containing her daughter's grandmother's locket, watching Theodore's profile in the dashboard's soft glow as he navigated the interstate with quiet competence. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked softly, his voice carefully neutral. "Every 5 minutes," Camille admitted. "But that doesn't mean I'm changing my mind." Something shifted in Theodore's expression, a subtle relaxation around his eyes that suggested relief. "Good. Because I have to confess something. I've been searching for Marcus for so long that when I finally found evidence he died, I felt like I'd failed not just him, but Mrs. Beauregard. Finding you and the girls, it feels like redemption." The intimacy of the confession, shared in the cocoon of darkness and highway hum, made Camille's pulse quicken. She studied Theodore's hands on the steering wheel, strong, steady, with a thin scar across his knuckles that spoke of some long-ago accident. "How long have you been Mrs. Beauregard's lawyer?" 23 years. I was fresh out of law school when she hired me to find Marcus. It was supposed to be a simple missing person case." Theodore's laugh held no humor. "I had no idea I was taking on a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Louisiana's social services system." "Conspiracy?" The word sent a chill down Camille's spine. "Children from wealthy families don't just disappear accidentally, Camille. There was a network, social workers, judges, administrators, who made fortunes stealing children and selling them into adoption by families who would never ask questions about their origins." In the back seat, Aria shifted in her sleep, murmuring something about butterflies. The sound of her daughter's innocence against the backdrop of Theodore's dark revelation made Camille's protective instincts flare. "Are we safe?" she asked. "Are the girls safe?" Theodore's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "Most of the network was dismantled years ago. Most, but not all. There are people who have spent decades keeping their crimes buried, and your arrival in Louisiana with Marcus's children might make some of them nervous." "Theodore." Camille's voice carried a warning edge. "If you're putting my daughters in danger, I would die before I let anything happen to them," he said with such fierce conviction that Camille felt her breath catch. "But I won't lie to you about the risks. Mrs. Beauregard has been fighting these people for 30 years, and she's made enemies." The highways stretched ahead of them, empty except for the occasional truck carrying cargo through the night. Camille found herself studying Theodore's profile again, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes constantly checked the rearview mirror. This wasn't just a simple inheritance case, it was something far more dangerous and complex. "Tell me about her," Camille said, partly to distract herself from her growing anxiety and partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "Mrs. Beauregard. What kind of woman is she?" Theodore's expression softened immediately. "Strong. Brilliant. Stubborn as hell when she believes in something. She built the Beauregard fortune from nothing after her husband died, turning a small shipping company into a Louisiana empire. But when Marcus disappeared..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It broke something in her. She never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, but she also never really lived again. Just existed, waiting. That must have been lonely. Devastatingly so. The mansion has staff, of course, but no family. No laughter. No children's voices in the halls." Theodore glanced at the sleeping twins in his rearview mirror. "She's going to weep when she sees them. Happy tears, but still, be prepared." As if summoned by their conversation, Zoe stirred in the back seat, opening sleepy eyes. "Mama? Are we there yet?" "Not yet, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." "I can't sleep anymore. My tummy feels funny." Zoe sat up, rubbing her eyes. Where are we? Somewhere in Mississippi, Theodore said. We'll be in Louisiana in a few hours. Is it different from home? Zoe asked, and Camille noticed she still referred to their cramped apartment as home, despite everything that had happened. Very different, Theodore said. There are big trees covered in hanging moss, and flowers everywhere, and the air smells like magnolia blossoms. What's magnolia? The most beautiful flower in the South, Theodore replied. Sweet-smelling, with petals as white as snow and leaves so green they look like they're made of velvet. Despite her lingering anxiety, Camille found herself smiling at the gentle way Theodore spoke to Zoe. Marcus had talked to the twins the same way, as if their questions were the most important things in the world. Mr. Theodore? Zoe's voice was small in the darkness. What if our great-grandma doesn't like us? The question hung in the air like a fragile bubble, and Camille felt her heart clench. Of course the twins would be worried about acceptance. They'd lost their father, nearly lost their home, and now they were being taken to meet a stranger who might or might not welcome them. Zoe, Theodore said softly, your great-grandmother has been waiting for you since before you were born. She's going to love you so much that you might get tired of all the hugging. I don't get tired of hugging, Zoe said solemnly. Good. Because Mrs. Evangeline gives the best hugs in Louisiana. As Zoe settled back into sleep, Camille caught Theodore glancing at her with something that looked like admiration mixed with concern. The look lingered a moment longer than necessary, and she felt an unexpected flutter of awareness, not just of his kindness with her daughters, but of him as a man. The thought startled her. She hadn't looked at anyone that way since Marcus died, hadn't even imagined she could. You're good with them, she said quietly. I've had practice. Mrs. Beauregard has a goddaughter who has 3 children. They visit sometimes, and the house comes alive in ways that... He trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. Camille, there's something I should tell you. About Mrs. Beauregard's will. The flutter of attraction died instantly, replaced by cold wariness. What about it? She's named you and the twins as her primary beneficiaries. Everything, the house, the businesses, the investments, will go to you when she passes. That's impossible. She doesn't even know us. She knows you're Marcus's family. That's enough for her. Theodore's voice grew gentle but serious. But it also means that people who have been waiting for her to die without heirs are going to be very unhappy about your existence. The highway suddenly seemed darker, more threatening. Camille thought about the $20 that had been her entire inheritance from Marcus. And now she was being told her daughter stood to inherit millions from a woman they'd never met. How unhappy? She asked. Unhappy enough to have spent considerable money over the years trying to prove that Marcus was dead and had no legitimate heirs, Theodore said carefully. There are distant relatives who have been circling like vultures, waiting to claim the estate. Your arrival threatens everything they've planned. Maybe we should turn around, Camille said suddenly, panic fluttering in her chest like a trapped bird. Maybe this is too dangerous, too complicated. Camille. Theodore's voice was firm but kind. Look at your daughters. Really look at them. She turned to see Arya and Zoe sleeping peacefully, their small faces relaxed and content in ways she hadn't seen since Marcus died. They looked secure, safe, as if some part of them already knew they were finally going home. They deserve this, Theodore continued. They deserve to know their great-grandmother, to understand their heritage, to have the opportunities that Marcus never had. Yes, there are risks. But there are greater risks in staying poor and powerless. And what about you? Camille asked, the question emerging before she could stop it. What do you get out of all this? Theodore was quiet for so long that Camille thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The chance to watch Mrs. Beauregard's face when she meets her great-granddaughters. The opportunity to finally complete the promise I made to find her family. He paused, then added something so quietly she almost missed it. And maybe the privilege of helping you build the life Marcus would have wanted for you all. The words settled between them like a bridge either of them had expected to cross. Camille felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the darkness that hid her reaction. There was something in Theodore's tone that suggested his interest in her family's welfare wasn't entirely professional. Before she could analyze the implications of that realization, Theodore's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the display made his expression darken. "Detective Morrison. I need to take this," he said, accepting the call. "Morrison, what's wrong?" Camille couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Theodore's face grow increasingly grim as he listened. "When?" Theodore asked. "How bad?" "I see. No, we're already on the road." "Yes, I understand the implications." He ended the call and was silent for a moment, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Theodore?" Camille's voice was tight with fear. "What happened?" "There was a break-in at Mrs. Beauregard's house tonight," he said quietly. "Nothing was stolen, but someone was definitely searching for something. The police think it's connected to word getting out that I'd found Marcus's family." The highway stretched ahead of them, leading toward a future that had just become infinitely more complicated and dangerous. But in the back seat, Aria and Zoe slept on, dreaming of great-grandmothers and magnolia flowers, blissfully unaware that their arrival in Louisiana might put everyone they were learning to love in mortal peril. Dawn was breaking over the Louisiana bayou when they finally turned onto the oak-lined drive that led to the Beauregard mansion. Spanish moss hung like tattered lace from ancient trees, and the morning mist gave everything an ethereal quality that made Camille feel as though they were driving into a fairy tale. The twins pressed their faces to the windows, wide-eyed at the endless expanse of manicured grounds. "It's like a castle, Mama," Aria whispered in awe. "It's bigger than our whole neighborhood," Zoe added, and Camille's heart clenched at the wonder in her daughter's voice. The mansion rose before them like something from another era, 3 stories of pristine white columns and wraparound porches, with flower gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see. Despite the early hour, every window glowed with warm light, as if the house itself was eager to welcome them home. But it was the figure standing on the front steps that stole Camille's breath away. Even from a distance, she could see that Evangeline Beauregard was a force of nature, tall, regal, with silver hair braided into an elegant crown and a posture that spoke of decades of commanding respect. She wore a flowing purple dress that seemed to move with the morning breeze, and her hands were clasped at her waist as if she were barely restraining herself from running toward the car. "She's beautiful," Camille murmured. "She's been standing there since 4 a.m., Theodore said softly. "I called to warn her we were close, and she said she couldn't possibly wait inside for another moment." As soon as the car stopped, both twins were unbuckling their seatbelts and tumbling out with the boundless energy of children who had been cooped up too long. But they stopped short when they saw Evangeline, suddenly shy in the presence of this magnificent stranger who was somehow family. Evangeline's composure cracked like ice in spring. Her hands flew to her mouth, and tears began streaming down her cheeks as she took in every detail of the twins, their father's eyes, their grandmother's smile, the way they stood close together for comfort in new situations. "Marcus's babies," she whispered, her voice carrying across the morning air. "My sweet lord, they look just like him." Camille climbed out of the car, her legs unsteady after the long drive, and found herself face to face with the woman who had been searching for her family for 3 decades. Up close, Evangeline's resemblance to Marcus was even more striking, not just in features, but in the way she carried herself, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw that Camille recognized from countless arguments about Marcus's refusal to ask for help even when they desperately needed it. "You must be Camille," Evangeline said, her voice rich with emotion and the musical cadence of old Louisiana. "Child, you are even more beautiful than Theodore described." Before Camille could respond, she found herself enveloped in a hug that smelled of jasmine and felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. Evangeline's embrace was warm and fierce and desperately grateful, and Camille understood that this woman had been waiting to hold Marcus's family for longer than her daughters had been alive. "Thank you," Evangeline whispered in her ear. "Thank you for bringing them to me. I think maybe you're the one doing us a favor," Camille said, surprised to find her own eyes filled with tears. Evangeline pulled back, studying Camille's face with the intensity of someone memorizing precious details. "Theodore told me about your circumstances, child. About the struggles you've faced. That's over now, you understand? Your family. Your home." The twins had been watching this exchange with the solemn attention children reserve for adult emotions they don't quite understand but recognize as important. It was Zoe who finally stepped forward, tugging gently on Evangeline's purple dress. "Are you really our great-grandma?" she asked. Evangeline's face transformed with joy as she knelt to the twins' eye level, her elegant dress pooling around her like flower petals. "I am indeed, precious girl. And you must be Zoe, because you have your great-grandfather's thoughtful eyes." "How did you know?" Zoe asked, amazed. "Because I've been studying pictures of you that Theodore brought me, memorizing every detail." Evangeline turned to Arya. "And you, sweet child, must be Arya. You have your daddy's mischievous smile." Arya giggled, the sound bright as morning birdsong. "Mama says Daddy used to get in trouble for smiling when he wasn't supposed to." "Oh, that smile got your daddy in trouble more times than I can count," a new voice said from the mansion's front door. "Though I suppose now it would be more accurate to say it got your great-uncle Marcus in trouble." All heads turned toward the speaker, a tall, distinguished black man in his 50s, with graying temples and an expensive suit that somehow made Theodore's look modest by comparison. He approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, but his smile was warm and genuine as he looked at the twins. "Camille, girls, I'd like you to meet James Beauregard," Theodore said, and Camille detected a subtle tension in his voice. "Mrs. Beauregard's nephew. Great-nephew, actually," James corrected smoothly, extending his hand to Camille. "My grandmother and Evangeline were sisters. I've been helping manage the family businesses while Aunt Evangeline focused on her search for Marcus." Something about James's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and Camille felt a flutter of unease. There was nothing overtly wrong with him. His manners were perfect, his greeting appropriately warm. But she caught the way Theodore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the way Evangeline's expression grew slightly more guarded. "James," Evangeline said carefully, "I didn't expect you this early. I couldn't sleep after Theodore called with the wonderful news," James replied, his tone exactly right but somehow feeling rehearsed. "I had to come meet the long-lost heiresses immediately." The word heiresses hung in the air with an uncomfortable weight. Arya and Zoe had no idea what it meant, but Camille understood perfectly, as did Theodore, whose protective stance beside her became more pronounced. "How thoughtful of you," Evangeline said with the kind of polite coolness that suggested decades of family politics. "But I'm sure you understand that the girls need time to settle in before meeting extended family." Of course," James agreed readily. "I just wanted to pay my respects and assure dear Camille that the entire family is overjoyed by this reunion." His gaze moved from Camille to the twins with calculating assessment. "Though I have to say, the resemblance is remarkable. No one could question that these are Marcus's daughters." "Why would anyone question it?" Camille asked, her maternal instincts prickling. "Oh, they wouldn't," James said quickly. "I simply meant that it's wonderful to have such clear family resemblance. It will make the legal proceedings much smoother." "Legal proceedings?" Camille's voice sharpened. Theodore stepped closer to her side. "Standard inheritance documentation. Nothing to worry about." But James's smile took on a slightly predatory edge. "Actually, Theodore, I've been meaning to discuss some complications that have arisen. Perhaps we should speak privately? Any complications can be discussed in front of Camille, Theodore said firmly. She's the girl's mother and Marcus's widow. She has every right to be informed of any issues. Very well. James's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. It seems there are some questions about the validity of Marcus and Camille's marriage certificate. The words hit Camille like a physical blow. What questions? Nothing serious, I'm sure, James said with false reassurance. But when inheritances of this magnitude are involved, certain interested parties tend to scrutinize every document very carefully. There are some irregularities in the paperwork that may require additional authentication. Evangeline's face had gone pale. James, what are you saying? I'm saying that until we can verify the legitimacy of the marriage, and by extension the girl's legal status as heirs, it might be prudent to postpone any official recognition of their inheritance claims. The morning that had begun with such joy and hope suddenly felt poisoned. Camille watched her daughters playing in the garden, oblivious to the adults' conversation, and felt the familiar weight of desperation settling on her shoulders. Our marriage was completely legal, she said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. We were married at the courthouse in... Oh, I'm sure it was, James interrupted smoothly. But courthouse records from that era are notoriously prone to inconsistencies. Clerical errors, misfiled documents, that sort of thing. It may take months to sort out. Theodore's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. James, that's enough. I'm simply looking out for the family's interests, Theodore. Surely you understand the need for proper due diligence? What I understand, Theodore said, stepping protectively in front of Camille, is that you've had 30 years to prepare for this possibility, and now that Marcus's legitimate heirs have been found, you're scrambling to find ways to invalidate their claims. The mask of family warmth finally slipped from James's face, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Careful, Theodore. You're an employee here, not family. Your services could be terminated at any time. Actually, Evangeline's voice rang out with surprising steel. Theodore is much more than an employee. He's been like a son to me for 23 years, and his loyalty has never been in question. Her gaze fixed on James with laser intensity. Unlike some people who share my blood but not my values. The confrontation that Camille sensed building was interrupted by Aria's delighted squeal from the garden. Mama! Come see! There are butterflies everywhere! The innocent joy in her daughter's voice was like cold water on the heated tension between the adults. Camille looked from James's calculating expression to Theodore's protective stance to Evangeline's fierce loyalty, and made a decision that surprised even herself. James, she said, her voice calm and clear, I appreciate your concern for the family's legal interests. But I want you to understand something very clearly. She stepped closer to him, drawing on strength she didn't know she possessed. Those little girls playing in your family's garden have already lost their father. They've been through eviction notices and empty refrigerators and nights when their mother cried herself to sleep wondering how to keep them safe. I will not, I repeat, will not, allow anyone to use legal technicalities to hurt them further. James's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he were surprised by her directness. So here's what's going to happen, Camille continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. You're going to give Theodore and me access to whatever records you think need reviewing. We're going to prove, once and for all, that my marriage to Marcus was completely legitimate and that Aria and Zoe are his legal daughters. And when we're done, you're going to apologize to Mrs. Beauregard for trying to manipulate her in her own home. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the twins' laughter floating across the morning air. James stared at Camille as if seeing her clearly for the first time, and she realized that he had underestimated her completely. He had expected a grieving widow who could be intimidated by legal threats and family politics. Instead, he had encountered a mother who would fight heaven and hell to protect her children, Well, James said finally, his smile returning but lacking its earlier confidence. I can see where the girls get their spirit. Very well, Camille. I look forward to reviewing those documents with you. As he walked away, Theodore moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. That, he said quietly, was magnificent. But Camille barely heard him. She was watching James's retreating figure and thinking about break-ins and mysterious phone calls and the way his eyes had assessed her daughters like commodities rather than children. Have you ever had to stand up to someone trying to intimidate your family? What gave you the strength to find your voice in that moment? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes our fiercest courage emerges when we're protecting the people we love most. Whatever game James Beauregard was playing, she realized, this confrontation was just the opening move. The real battle for her daughter's future was only beginning. 3 weeks at the Beauregard mansion should have felt like a fairy tale come true. The twins had settled into their new life with the adaptability of children, running through gardens that seemed to stretch forever, learning to play piano on the grand Steinway in the music room, and spending hours listening to Evangeline's stories about their father's family history. Aria had claimed the tower bedroom with its view of the bayou, while Zoe preferred the cozy room next to Evangeline's suite, where she could hear her great-grandmother's gentle breathing at night. But for Camille, each passing day felt like walking deeper into quicksand. James's legal challenges had multiplied like hydras. Each document they provided to prove their legitimacy spawned 2 more requests for verification. The marriage certificate needed additional authentication. The twins' birth certificates required genetic testing to confirm paternity. Even Marcus's death certificate was being questioned, with James's lawyers suggesting that without absolute proof of death, any inheritance claims were premature. It's harassment, Theodore said, pacing the length of Evangeline's study while afternoon rain drummed against the windows. Pure and simple. He's trying to exhaust our resources and your patience. Camille sat in the leather chair behind the massive oak desk, surrounded by stacks of legal documents that seemed to multiply overnight. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 weeks ago she'd had $20 to her name, and now she was fighting for an inheritance worth millions, but somehow felt more powerless than ever. How long can this go on? She asked, rubbing her temples where a persistent headache had taken residence. As long as James wants it to, Theodore admitted reluctantly. He has virtually unlimited resources and a team of lawyers whose only job is to find loopholes and create delays. Through the study's tall windows, Camille could see Aria and Zoe playing in the garden with Evangeline, their laughter carrying on the humid air. Her daughters looked happier than they had since Marcus died, healthier, more secure, surrounded by love and abundance. The thought of tearing them away from this newfound stability made her chest tight with panic. There's something else, Theodore said quietly, and the tone of his voice made Camille's blood run cold. Detective Morrison called this morning. They've been investigating the break-in, and they found something troubling. Camille braced herself. The intruder wasn't looking for valuables. They were specifically searching Evangeline's private papers, birth records, family documents, anything related to Marcus's disappearance 30 years ago. What does that mean? Theodore sat down across from her, his expression grave. It means James isn't just challenging your inheritance claims. He's actively trying to destroy evidence that might support them. The study door opened with a soft click, and Evangeline entered carrying a silver tea service that rattled slightly in her trembling hands. At 87, she remained formidable, but the stress of the legal battles was taking its toll. Her usually perfect posture had developed a slight stoop, and there were new lines of worry around her eyes. Grandmother, Theodore said, rising quickly to take the heavy tray from her hands. You should have asked Clara to bring this. Clara has enough to do without waiting on me, Evangeline said with a tired smile. Besides, I needed to speak with you both. She settled into her favorite chair by the window, her movements careful and deliberate. For the first time since Camille had met her, Evangeline looked every one of her 87 years. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "Perhaps it would be better if you and the girls left Louisiana. At least until this legal mess is resolved." "No." Camille's response was immediate and fierce. "We're not running away. Child, this isn't running. This is protecting those precious babies from a fight that's becoming more dangerous every day." Evangeline's hands shook slightly as she poured tea. "James has resources I can't match anymore. He has connections, influence, money to burn on lawyers who don't care about justice." "You're giving up?" Camille asked, shocked. "I'm being realistic." Evangeline's voice cracked slightly. "I'm an old woman, Camille. I don't have the energy to fight the way I used to. Maybe it's time to accept that some battles can't be won." The defeat in Evangeline's voice was more devastating than any legal threat James could devise. This woman had spent 30 years searching for Marcus, had never given up hope, had built an empire while waiting for her grandson to come home. Seeing her surrender felt like watching the sun decide not to rise. Theodore's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened further. "It's my contact at the courthouse. I need to take this." As Theodore stepped into the hallway, Camille moved to sit beside Evangeline, taking the older woman's trembling hands in her own. "You can't give up now," she said softly. "Not after everything. Not after 30 years of searching. 30 years of searching that led to 18 months of grief for you." Evangeline replied, tears threatening to spill. "Look what I've brought into your life, child. Legal battles, threats, uncertainty. You were struggling before, yes, but you were safe. Now my daughters have a great-grandmother who loves them. Now they're learning piano and sleeping in beds fit for princesses and eating 3 meals a day without me having to count quarters." Camille's grip tightened on Evangeline's hands. "You didn't bring chaos into our lives, you brought hope. Hope that might destroy you." Before Camille could respond, Theodore returned to the study, his face ashen. The phone call had clearly brought devastating news. "What is it?" Camille asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "James has filed a motion to have the girls removed from the estate pending the outcome of the inheritance dispute," Theodore said, his voice hollow. "He's claiming that until their legitimacy is proven, they have no right to remain on Beauregard property." The words hit Camille like a physical blow. "He can't do that." "Unfortunately, he can. And worse, he's requested an expedited hearing. We have 48 hours to respond, or a judge will issue a temporary custody order removing Aria and Zoe from the estate." "Custody order?" Camille's voice rose to a near shout. "He wants to take my children?" "Not permanently," Theodore said quickly. "Just until the inheritance questions are resolved. They would go into state custody temporarily." "Absolutely not." Camille stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled. "No one is taking my daughters anywhere." "Camille," Evangeline said gently, "maybe Theodore should explore the possibility of a compromise. If James could be assured that no compromises, no negotiations, no one touches my children." Camille's voice carried the iron certainty of a mother's love. "I don't care if I have to fight James and his lawyers and the entire Louisiana legal system. I will not let anyone separate me from Aria and Zoe." Through the window, she could see her daughters still playing in the garden, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. Zoe was teaching Evangeline some elaborate clapping game, while Aria gathered flowers for a bouquet. They looked so perfectly at home, so beautifully happy. The thought of explaining to them that they might have to leave, that someone was trying to take them away, made Camille's vision blur with rage. "What do we need to do?" she asked, turning back to Theodore with fierce determination. "What evidence do we need to gather? What lawyers do we need to hire? What documents do we need to find?" Theodore and Evangeline exchanged a look that made Camille's stomach drop. "Camille," Theodore said carefully, "James isn't just challenging your inheritance anymore. He's questioning your fitness as a mother. The custody motion includes allegations that you're an unfit guardian who brought the children into a dangerous situation for financial gain." "That's ridiculous." "Of course it is. But he has documentation of your recent eviction, your financial struggles, the fact that you left your home state with a stranger to pursue an inheritance claim." Theodore's voice grew pained. "On paper, his argument has just enough merit to concern a family court judge." The room tilted slightly, and Camille had to grip the back of her chair to steady herself. In trying to give her daughters a better life, had she actually put them at risk of losing them completely? "There's one more thing," Theodore said reluctantly. "James has hired a private investigator to dig into your background. He's looking for any evidence that might support his claims of unfitness." "He won't find anything," Camille said automatically. "Are you certain? No arrests, no credit problems, no—" "I said he won't find anything." But even as she spoke, a cold finger of doubt traced down her spine. Her credit was destroyed from Marcus's medical bills. There had been that incident at the grocery store when she'd accidentally left without paying for items she'd forgotten were in the bottom of the cart. A mistake, but one that had required police involvement to resolve. And there were the nights when grief had sent her to the emergency room thinking she was having a heart attack, only to learn it was panic attacks brought on by overwhelming stress. On their own, these incidents meant nothing. But in the hands of a skilled lawyer looking to paint her as an unstable, irresponsible mother. "Oh God," she whispered, sinking back into her chair. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the bayou, and the first rumbles of thunder echoed across the water. Inside the study, the three adults sat in stunned silence, each lost in their own thoughts about impossible choices and unwinnable battles. For the first time since Theodore had appeared at her apartment door, Camille wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. In trying to secure her daughter's future, had she actually destroyed it? The sound of running footsteps in the hallway broke the oppressive quiet, and Aria burst into the study with mud on her dress and joy in her eyes. "Mama! Great-Grandma Evie taught us how to catch lightning bugs in mason jars. Can we stay up late tonight to watch them glow?" Camille looked at her daughter's radiant face, then at Evangeline's sorrowful expression, then at Theodore's protective stance, and felt her heart shatter into pieces that might never fit back together again. "We'll see, baby," she managed. "We'll see." At 3 a.m, Camille found herself alone in Evangeline's study, surrounded by 30 years of legal documents and family records spread across every surface like pieces of an impossibly complex puzzle. Theodore had gone home hours ago, exhausted from another day of legal battles, and Evangeline had finally accepted Clara's gentle insistence that she needed rest. But sleep was impossible for Camille. In 18 hours, she would face a judge who might decide her daughters belonged in state custody. The house creaked around her with the comfortable sounds of an old mansion settling into night, and through the tall windows she could see fireflies dancing over the bayou like fallen stars. Somewhere in this maze of documents had to be the key to proving that Aria and Zoe belonged here, that Marcus had been a Beauregard, that her marriage was legitimate and her motherhood unquestionable. She was studying a faded photograph of Marcus's parents when she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. The study door opened quietly, and Zoe appeared in her nightgown, clutching the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was a baby. "Mama? Why are you awake?" "Just reading, sweetheart." "What are you doing up?" Zoe padded across the Persian rug and climbed into Camille's lap with the easy affection of a child who had never doubted her welcome anywhere. "I had a dream about Daddy. He said you were worried about something and I should come help." The simple statement hit Camille like a lightning bolt. Marcus had always believed that children possessed a kind of wisdom adults lost along the way, an ability to see truth that wasn't clouded by fear and doubt. Maybe what she needed wasn't more legal documents or expert testimonies. Maybe she needed to see this situation through the eyes of a 6-year-old who trusted that love would always find a way. "What do you think I should do, baby?" she asked, holding her daughter close. Zoe considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Great-Grandma Evie says that when you can't find something, you should look in the places where love lives." "Where does love live?" "In the places people keep their most special things," Zoe said matter-of-factly. "Like in jewelry boxes and picture frames and—" She paused, looking around the study with its walls of books and family portraits. "In old letters tied with ribbons." Camille followed her daughter's gaze to an antique secretary desk in the corner that she hadn't yet searched. It was beautiful but unremarkable, the kind of elegant furniture that filled every room of the mansion. But something about Zoe's words made her look at it differently. "Can you stay awake for a few more minutes to help Mama search?" Camille asked. Zoe nodded solemnly, and together they approached the secretary desk. The drawers were filled with the usual detritus of decades: old receipts, business correspondence, appointment calendars from years past. But when Camille pulled out the bottom drawer completely, she discovered something that made her heart stop. Hidden beneath the drawer was a secret compartment, and inside that compartment was a small cedar box tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Love lives in places like this," Zoe said with satisfaction. With trembling fingers, Camille untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to "My dearest Marcus," in Evangeline's elegant handwriting. The postmarks ranged from 34 years ago to just 18 months before, the entire span of Marcus's life. "Mama," Zoe whispered, "Great-Grandma Evie wrote letters to Daddy even when she didn't know where he was." Camille opened the top letter, dated just 3 months after Marcus's disappearance, and began to read aloud. "My dearest Marcus, today is your 2nd birthday, and I have made you a chocolate cake even though you are not here to eat it. I told you about the ducks on the bayou and how they remember their babies even when they've been separated. I know you can't hear me, but I hope somehow you know that your grandmama loves you and will never stop looking for you." Tears blurred Camille's vision as she reached for another letter, this one dated 15 years later. "My dearest Marcus, Theodore found a boy in Memphis who looked like you might look now, but it wasn't you. I wasn't disappointed, I was hopeful. Every false lead means we're one step closer to finding the real you. I bought you a graduation present today, even though I don't know if you're finishing high school or college or if you even know how to read. But a grandmother's love doesn't need logic, only faith." And another dated just 2 years ago. "My dearest Marcus, I dreamed about you last night. You were a father in my dream, with 2 little girls who had your smile. When I woke up, I wasn't sad because I felt like God was showing me that even if I never find you, part of you continues. Maybe love multiplies itself, and your children will carry forward everything beautiful about you into the world." Camille's hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the letters. Here was 30 years of documented love, of a grandmother who never stopped believing, who wrote to a ghost boy and bought presents for someone who might not exist and dreamed of great-granddaughters before they were born. "There are so many letters, Mama," Zoe said in wonder. "One for every month for 30 years. Camille realized. She never missed a single month. At the bottom of the box was something that made Camille gasp, a thick manila envelope labeled, "For Marcus's wife, if she exists." Inside was a legal document that took her several readings to fully understand, but when she did, her heart soared. It was a private investigator's report from 1995, documenting evidence of the corruption in Louisiana's social services system. Names, dates, financial records, testimony from whistleblowers, everything needed to prove that Marcus had been stolen, not abandoned. And at the bottom of the report was a notarized statement from a former social worker named Patricia Hendricks, confessing her role in the scheme and specifically naming Marcus Beauregard as one of the children who had been illegally removed from their families. "Zoe," Camille said, her voice filled with wonder. Your great-grandmother solved the whole mystery 27 years ago. She's been keeping the proof safe all this time, waiting for us to find it. Because she knew we would come home eventually," Zoe said with the simple wisdom of childhood. Camille was reaching for the phone to call Theodore when the study door opened again. This time it was Aria, followed by Evangeline in her silk robe, both drawn by the sound of voices and the pull of something important happening. "What have you two night owls discovered?" Evangeline asked, but when she saw the open cedar box and the letters spread across the desk, her face went pale. "You wrote to him," Camille said softly. "Every month for 30 years, you wrote letters to Marcus." Evangeline's composure finally cracked completely. She sank into a chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I couldn't stop hoping. Even when the investigators found nothing, even when the lawyers said to give up, I couldn't stop believing that somewhere he was growing up and maybe, somehow, he knew he was loved. And this," Camille held up the investigator's report. "This proves everything. James can't challenge our legitimacy now, because this document proves Marcus was stolen illegally. It proves you never gave up custody willingly. It proves everything." Evangeline looked at the report with eyes that held 30 years of vindication. "Patricia Hendricks came forward in 1995, terrified for her life but unable to live with what she'd done. I paid for her protection, relocated her family, made sure she had everything she needed to start over safely." "Is she still alive?" Camille asked. "Very much so. Living in Oregon under a new identity, with grandchildren of her own now." Evangeline's smile held the fierce joy of a warrior who had finally won an impossible battle. "And she's been waiting 27 years for the chance to testify about what really happened to Marcus." Camille looked around the study at her daughters, who were listening to this revelation with the grave attention of children who understood they were witnessing something historic, and at Evangeline, whose face had transformed from defeated exhaustion to blazing hope. "James doesn't know about any of this, does he?" Camille asked. "No one knows except Theodore and me. I was saving it." Evangeline's voice caught. "I was saving it for when Marcus came home, so I could prove to him that he had never been unwanted, never been abandoned. That every day he was missing, someone was fighting to bring him back." The phone rang, startling them all. At 3:30 in the morning, calls rarely brought good news. But when Camille answered, it was Theodore's voice, tight with urgency. "Camille, thank God you're awake. I've been doing research all night, and I found something. James's legal challenges have a fatal flaw. He's been operating under the assumption that Marcus was legitimately placed for adoption. But if we could prove Marcus was stolen—" "Theodore," Camille interrupted, looking at the investigator's report in her hand, "you need to come back to the house right now. And bring your biggest legal briefcase." "Why? What happened?" Camille looked at her daughters, both wide awake now and buzzing with the excitement of being part of something important, then at Evangeline, whose tears had transformed into the smile of a woman who had just remembered she was a Beauregard, and Beauregards never surrendered. "We just found the evidence that's going to destroy James's case so completely that he'll never threaten our family again," she said. "Love found a way, Theodore. Just like it always does." Outside, dawn was beginning to break over the bayou, painting the sky in shades of hope and new beginnings. In 6 hours they would walk into that courtroom not as desperate people begging for mercy, but as a family armed with the truth and 30 years of documented, unwavering love. For the first time since this legal nightmare began, Camille knew with absolute certainty that her daughters were safe, that they were home, and that some battles, the ones fought with love instead of law, could never truly be lost. The courthouse in New Orleans buzzed with an energy that suggested everyone present understood they were about to witness something extraordinary. Word had somehow leaked that the Beauregard inheritance case would be resolved today, and the gallery was packed with curious onlookers, reporters, and what appeared to be half of Louisiana's legal community. Camille sat at the plaintiff's table between Theodore, and a silver-haired woman in her 70s who had flown in from Oregon the night before. Patricia Hendricks looked nervous but determined, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she watched James Beauregard's team of lawyers shuffle through their documents with increasing desperation. They had requested a postponement twice already this morning. Both requests had been denied. Behind them, Evangeline sat in the front row with Aria and Zoe, who were dressed in matching blue dresses and had insisted on coming to court to help Mama win. The twins didn't fully understand the legal proceedings, but they understood that this was the day someone would try to take them away from their great-grandmother, and their small faces held the fierce determination of children who had already lost one parent and refused to lose anything else. Judge Helen Martinez, a formidable woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, called the court to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "We're here today to resolve the custody petition filed by Mr. James Beauregard regarding the minor children Aria and Zoe Washington, and to address the ongoing questions about their inheritance claims. Mr. Beauregard, you may present your case." James's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, rose with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the winning cards. "Your Honor, my client seeks temporary custody of these children based on substantial questions about their legitimacy as heirs to the Beauregard estate. We contend that." "Objection," Theodore said, standing smoothly. "Your Honor, before Mr. Beauregard's counsel proceeds, we would like to present evidence that fundamentally alters the nature of this case." Judge Martinez raised an eyebrow. "What kind of evidence, Mr. Whitmore?" "Evidence that proves Marcus Washington was, in fact, Marcus Beauregard III, and that he was illegally removed from his family through a criminal conspiracy involving corrupt state officials." A murmur ran through the courtroom. James's face went pale, and Camille saw him lean over to whisper urgently to his lawyer. "That's a very serious allegation, Mr. Whitmore," Judge Martinez said. "I hope you have substantial proof." "We do, Your Honor." Theodore placed the investigator's report on the evidence table. "This is a comprehensive investigation conducted in 1995 by licensed private investigator Robert Chin, documenting a network of corruption within Louisiana's social services system. The report specifically identifies Marcus Beauregard as one of several children who were illegally removed from wealthy families and placed in the foster system to prevent them from claiming their inheritances." James's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is clearly a fabrication designed to—" "Furthermore," Theodore continued, his voice carrying over the objection, "we have a witness who was directly involved in the conspiracy and is prepared to testify under oath about her role in Marcus Beauregard's illegal removal." All eyes turned to Patricia Hendricks as she stood, her voice shaking but clear. "Your Honor, my name is Patricia Hendricks, and 27 years ago I was a social worker who participated in the illegal trafficking of children from wealthy families. I was paid $50,000 to falsify documents and ensure that 2-year-old Marcus Beauregard disappeared into the foster system where he could never be found." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispered exclamations. Judge Martinez banged her gavel for order. "Mrs. Hendricks," she said sternly, "you understand that you're confessing to serious felonies under oath?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've been living with this guilt for 30 years. And when I learned that Marcus had died without ever knowing his real family, I couldn't stay silent any longer." Patricia's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Mrs. Evangeline Beauregard has been protecting me and my family since 1995 when I first came forward. She could have had me arrested, could have destroyed my life, but instead she helped me start over safely so that someday I could testify to the truth." James was whispering frantically to his legal team, but Camille could see from their expressions that they had no defense against testimony they'd never seen coming. "Mrs. Hendricks," Theodore said gently, "do you recognize anyone in this courtroom?" Patricia looked directly at James, and her face hardened. "Yes. James Beauregard was one of the people who paid us. He was in his 20s then, working for his family's business, and he specifically requested that we ensure Marcus could never be found. He said the Beauregard fortune was too large to risk on a child who might grow up to challenge the family's control. That's a lie! James shouted, jumping to his feet. Your Honor, this woman is clearly being paid to fabricate these accusations. Actually, Theodore said calmly, producing another document. We have bank records from 1995 showing payments from a company controlled by James Beauregard to a shell organization that we can now prove was used to funnel money to corrupt social workers. Mrs. Hendricks kept meticulous records, knowing she might someday need protection from the people who hired her. Judge Martinez studied the documents Theodore handed her, her expression growing darker with each page. Mr. Beauregard, these are very serious allegations. Do you wish to respond? James's composure finally cracked completely. This is a setup. A conspiracy to destroy me and steal what's rightfully mine. That old woman has been planning this for decades. Rightfully yours? Evangeline's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade as she stood in the gallery. Your Honor, may I address the court? Mrs. Beauregard, you're not a party to these proceedings. Actually, Your Honor, Theodore interjected. Mrs. Beauregard is the legal guardian of the estate in question and has standing to speak on behalf of her great-granddaughter's interests. Judge Martinez nodded. Very well. Mrs. Beauregard, you may speak. Evangeline walked to the front of the courtroom with the regal bearing of a queen addressing her subjects. At 87, she had never looked more formidable or more beautiful. Your Honor, 30 years ago my grandson was stolen from a hospital bed while I recovered from surgery. For 3 decades, I searched for him, never knowing if he was alive or dead, safe or suffering. I wrote him letters every month, bought him birthday presents, kept his nursery exactly as it was, because a grandmother's love doesn't die just because the child disappears. Her voice grew stronger, carrying 30 years of grief and hope and unshakable faith. I found out 18 months ago that Marcus had died, and I thought my heart would finally break completely. But then Theodore found his widow and his children, my great-granddaughters, and I understood that love doesn't end with death. It multiplies, it continues, it finds new ways to grow. She turned to look at James with eyes that held both sorrow and steel. James, you took my grandson from me when he was too young to remember my face. You stole 30 years of bedtime stories and birthday parties and Christmas mornings. You robbed Marcus of knowing where he came from, who his people were, how much he was loved. But you did not win, because love found a way home anyway. Camille felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her daughters listening to their great-grandmother with wide, solemn eyes. Aria reached over to take Zoe's hand, and both girls nodded as if they understood every word. Your Honor, Evangeline continued, these children are not just heirs to money or property. They are the continuation of everything beautiful about Marcus, everything good that survived despite the evil that tried to destroy it. They belong with me not because of what they might inherit, but because we belong to each other. That's what family means. The courtroom was completely silent except for the soft sound of people crying. Even Judge Martinez wiped her eyes before speaking. Mr. James Beauregard, in light of this testimony and evidence, I am dismissing your custody petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering a criminal investigation into your role in the conspiracy described here today. She looked at Patricia Hendricks with something that might have been respect. Mrs. Hendricks, while your testimony today shows courage, you should be aware that criminal charges may still be filed. I understand, Your Honor. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from telling the truth. Judge Martinez turned to Camille with a warm smile. Mrs. Washington, it's clear that your daughters are in no danger from anyone except the man who tried to tear your family apart today. This court finds no merit whatsoever in any questions about your fitness as a mother or the legitimacy of your marriage. Your children will remain in your custody, and their inheritance claims are hereby validated. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that sounded like justice itself breaking through 30 years of lies. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers. Arya and Zoe broke free from the gallery and ran to Camille, who swept them both into her arms and held them like she never intended to let go. "We won, Mama!" Arya shouted over the noise. "We get to stay with Great-Grandma Evie forever," Zoe added. But it was Theodore who made Camille's heart stop completely. He was standing beside her, his usual professional composure replaced by something raw and vulnerable and utterly real. "Camille," he said, his voice barely audible above the celebration around them. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said weeks ago." She looked up at him, still holding her daughters, and saw in his eyes the same look Marcus used to get when he was about to say something that would change everything. "I love you," Theodore said simply. "I love you and Arya and Zoe, and I've been falling deeper in love every day since I first saw you fight for your children. I know it's complicated, I know it's too soon, but I couldn't let another day pass without you knowing that you're not just fighting for your daughter's future, you're fighting for all of our futures." Before Camille could respond, Evangeline appeared beside them, her face radiant with joy and vindication. "Well," she said with the satisfied smile of a woman who had just watched 30 years of planning come to perfect fruition, "I think this calls for a celebration. And Theodore, dear boy, I believe it's time we discussed making your place in this family official." As they walked out of the courthouse into the Louisiana sunshine, surrounded by reporters shouting questions and well-wishers offering congratulations, Camille felt Marcus's presence as clearly as if he were walking beside them. His love had led her to his family, his daughters to their heritage, and his widow to a man who would love them all with the same fierce devotion Marcus had shown. What moments in your life have felt like everything was falling apart, only to discover that they were actually falling into place? Sometimes our greatest victories come disguised as our deepest struggles. Share your thoughts below. Love really does find a way. James Beauregard was led away in handcuffs, his 30-year conspiracy finally exposed to the light. But Camille barely noticed. She was too busy planning a future that included piano lessons and bayou picnics and bedtime stories told by a great-grandmother who had never stopped believing in happy endings. Some battles, she had learned, were worth fighting not because victory was certain, but because love made them impossible to lose. 6 months later. The sound of children's laughter echoed across the bayou as Arya and Zoe chased fireflies through the gathering dusk, their matching sundresses fluttering like butterfly wings in the humid evening air. From her seat on the mansion's wraparound porch, Camille watched her daughters play with the carefree abandon of children who had never known a day of uncertainty, who slept each night in beds fit for princesses and woke each morning to a great-grandmother's gentle songs. "They've grown 3 inches since the trial," Theodore observed, settling into the porch swing beside her with 2 glasses of sweet tea that clinked gently in the evening breeze. "And I swear Arya's vocabulary has doubled since she started piano lessons with Mrs. Evangeline. Zoe's been writing stories," Camille said, leaning into Theodore's warmth as naturally as breathing. "Little books about brave princesses who rescue their families from dragons. She illustrates them herself and binds them with ribbon, following in her great-grandmother's footsteps. Mrs. Evangeline always said that stories have more power than laws." Through the open French doors, they could hear Evangeline's voice drifting from the music room where she was teaching the local children's choir. At 87, she had more energy than people half her age, as if finding her great-granddaughters had recharged some vital spark that had been dimming for 30 years. "The Beauregard Foundation approved 3 more scholarships today," Theodore mentioned, his arm tightening around Camille's shoulders. "That brings the total to 47 children who'll attend college because of Marcus's legacy." The foundation had been Camille's idea, a way to transform the wealth James had tried to steal into something that would honor Marcus's memory. Every penny of the inheritance was being used to help children who aged out of the foster system, providing them with education, mentorship, and the kind of support Marcus had never received. He would have loved that, Camille said softly. He always said that education was the one thing no one could ever take away from you. Speaking of things no one can take away, Theodore said, his voice taking on a tone that made Camille's pulse quicken. He stood and walked to the porch railing, then turned back to face her with an expression of nervous determination that reminded her of Aria when she was about to perform a new piano piece. Camille Washington, in the 6 months since I've known you, you've taught me more about courage and love and family than I learned in 43 years of living alone. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that caught the last rays of sunlight. You've shown me that some risks are worth taking, that some battles are worth fighting, and that some loves are worth waiting a lifetime to find. Camille's breath caught in her throat as Theodore dropped to one knee on the porch where she'd first met Evangeline, where her daughters had first played in a garden that was truly theirs, where a family torn apart by greed had finally been made whole by love. I know I'm not Marcus, he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I know I can never replace him in your heart, and I wouldn't want to. But I love you with everything I have, and I love Aria and Zoe as if they were my own daughters. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life protecting and cherishing the family that Marcus entrusted to my care? Before Camille could answer, the sound of running feet announced that the twins had spotted what was happening. They burst onto the porch with grass stains on their dresses and joy in their eyes. Are you asking Mama to marry you? Aria demanded, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Because we already talked about it, Zoe added seriously. And we decided you're definitely good enough for her. Theodore laughed, tears streaming down his cheeks. Well, that's a relief. I was worried about getting your approval. We approve, both girls said in unison, then dissolved into giggles. Camille looked at this man who had driven through the night to bring her family home, who had fought legal battles and faced down conspiracies and loved her daughters with the protective fierceness of a father from the moment he met them. She thought about Marcus, about the love they'd shared and the blessing he would give if he could see her now, surrounded by family and security and a future bright with possibility. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong and full of wonder. Yes, Theodore Whitmore, I will marry you. The ring slipped onto her finger like it had been made specifically for her hand, and when Theodore kissed her, the twins cheered and the fireflies danced, and somewhere in the mansion, Evangeline's voice rose in a song of thanksgiving. When's the wedding? Aria wanted to know. Can we wear matching dresses? Zoe added. Can Great-Grandma Evie walk us down the aisle since Daddy can't? The questions tumbled over each other in the eager way of children who had learned to trust that good things really could happen, that families could be rebuilt stronger than before, that love multiplied instead of divided. All of that and more, Camille promised, pulling her daughters close as Theodore's arms encircled them all. We'll have the most beautiful wedding Louisiana has ever seen, right here in Great-Grandma's garden, with flowers and music and all the people who love us. And cake? Zoe asked hopefully. The biggest cake in 3 parishes, Theodore promised solemnly. As if summoned by the mention of celebration, Evangeline appeared in the doorway, her face radiant with the kind of joy that comes from watching impossible dreams become reality. She moved slowly but regally across the porch, her silk dress rustling like autumn leaves. Well? She asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. Great-Grandma Evie, Aria announced importantly. Theodore asked Mama to marry him and she said yes, and we're going to have the biggest cake in 3 parishes. Are we indeed? Evangeline's eyes sparkled with mischief. Well, then I suppose I should tell you about the surprise I've been planning. She disappeared into the house and returned moments later with a leather portfolio that looked older than the mansion itself. Inside were architectural drawings that made everyone gasp, plans for a beautiful chapel to be built in the mansion's rose garden, complete with stained glass windows depicting the Beauregard family history. I commissioned these the week after the trial, Evangeline said with the satisfied smile of a woman who had been orchestrating happy endings for 87 years. I figured if Theodore was smart enough to fall in love with my granddaughter-in-law, I'd better give him a proper place to marry her. The drawings showed a chapel that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, with soaring arches and gardens that would bloom year-round. But it was the inscription Theodore spotted at the bottom of the plans that made his voice catch with emotion. The Marcus Beauregard Memorial Chapel, where love finds a way home. Construction begins next month, Evangeline continued. The wedding can be this Christmas, if you'd like. Nothing would make me happier than to see this family officially united under God's blessing. Christmas. The word hung in the evening air like a promise. Christmas with Theodore as her husband, with Aria and Zoe as his daughters, with Evangeline as their beloved matriarch, with a chapel built to honor Marcus's memory and celebrate the love that had brought them all together. Christmas it is, Camille said, and realized that for the first time since Marcus died, she was looking forward to the holidays instead of dreading them. As the evening deepened and the first stars appeared over the bayou, the family settled on the porch to watch the fireflies dance. Aria curled up in Theodore's lap, practicing the wedding march by humming softly, while Zoe leaned against Evangeline, listening to stories about all the weddings that had been celebrated on Beauregard land over the centuries. Camille sat between her past and her future, holding Theodore's hand while watching her daughters bloom like flowers in Louisiana soil. Sometimes she could feel Marcus's presence so strongly it took her breath away, not the aching grief she'd carried for 18 months, but a warm sense of gratitude and blessing, as if he were smiling down at the family he'd never lived to see but had somehow helped to create. "Mama," Zoe said sleepily, "do you think Daddy knows about the wedding?" "I think," Camille said, looking up at the stars that seemed to wink with celestial approval, "that Daddy knows about everything. And I think he's very, very happy." "Good," Zoe murmured. "Because I was going to save him a piece of cake anyway, just in case." The innocent statement brought tears to everyone's eyes and laughter to everyone's hearts, because that was exactly the kind of thoughtful, loving gesture Marcus would have appreciated most. Later that night, after the twins were tucked into beds that would never be uncertain again, after Evangeline had retired to dream of wedding preparations and Christmas celebrations, Camille and Theodore sat on the porch swing and planned their future. "We'll keep the foundation growing," Camille said. "Every child who needs help, every family that's struggling, will be there. And we'll travel," Theodore added. "Show the girls the world, let them see everything their father dreamed of seeing. But we'll always come home to this porch, to Evangeline's stories, to the place where love found a way." "Always," Theodore agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like sweet tea and forever. In the distance, a night bird called across the water, and the sound seemed to carry all the way to heaven, where a young father who had died too soon finally knew with absolute certainty that his wife and daughters were safe, were loved, were home. As you reflect on this story, what moments in your own life have shown you that love really does find a way? Sometimes our greatest losses lead to our most beautiful discoveries. Share your thoughts below. Every ending is really just a new beginning in disguise. The Beauregard mansion settled into peaceful sleep, sheltering 4 generations of love that had survived separation and grief and conspiracy and time itself. And in the morning, they would wake up together and begin planning the wedding that would make official what their hearts had already known: that families aren't just born, they're chosen, they're fought for, they're built one day of love at a time. Some stories end with justice. Some end with victory. The very best ones end with love multiplied, with hope renewed, with the understanding that every goodbye contains within it the seed of a new hello. This was one of those stories. This story was inspired by the power of family bonds that transcend death, the strength found in unexpected places, and the truth that love really does find a way home. Whether you're fighting your own battles or celebrating your own victories, remember that every ending is simply a new beginning waiting to unfold. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.